Give us a Frank Sinatra.
And now the end is near.
That's good. You can't sing, can you?
I can sing when I'm pretty drunk.
Yeah.
Pretty good at that.
No drummers can sing. Fact.
Dude, I used to do backing vocals in the band.
Did you?
Yeah. Had a little microphone and everything. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of Not Another Whiskey Podcast. If you're looking for chat about different spelling of whiskey around the world, why Indian whiskey uses molasses as their ingredient for making whiskey, where the northernmost and southernmost distilleries are in the world, what a whiskey tastes like when it has used 14 whiskies from all around the world, then you've come to the right place this week, because today, my friends, we are opening the lid on World Whiskies. My name is Mitch Beshard, and as always, I am joined by my whiskey swashbuckling pirate partner, Daz Haldane. Daz, how's it going, man?
That's right, man. We're moving out of our little comfort blanket zone of Scotland and going on a wee journey around the world. So stay tuned as we go around the world, get some crazy facts. And we're actually going to be tasting whiskies today from Wales, Mexico. Mitch is going to be sampling some Gold Cock from the Czech Republic, and Sam Simmons is going to join us as well, just to talk a little bit about the depths and breadths of world whiskies and everything that is possible within those. He's a whiskey maker at Atom Brands, so he knows a thing or two about flavor, texture, aromas from whiskies from all over the shop.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one, actually, because I think there is a lot of interest from around the world for whiskies from around the world, I should say, right now, outside of Scotland. But before we get into this, Daz, let's jump in. What you've been up to, man? It's been a couple of weeks since we've done one of these. So what's the gossip with you?
Yeah, it has been. What's been happening? I've done a few tastings over the last few weeks, which has been really nice. We did a tasting at the start of the week on Monday. We did some of the Fable bottlings with some of our friends over in the States, which was really, really cool. We also did a Westlands tasting. So obviously the whiskey shows have been happening, haven't they? Whiskey Live Paris, Whiskey Show London, they've all been kicking off. So there's been quite a few people getting back out and about. So I had a good conversation with the guys from Westlands Distillery the week before last, and that was good. And I tasted quite a lot of their products, which I very much enjoyed.
Good juice, man. We actually talk about that a little bit later on with Sam. I'm a big fan of their liquids, so no, it's good, mate. Getting
what about you, man? What's been happening?
No, it's been crazy, mate. Been crazy. I was I took a little bit of time off, so we did a little family gig up to Aviemore. Had a house up there, just chilled out. Hardly drank any whiskey, actually. Just kind of sat about scratching myself most of the time. It's great. And then after that, went up to Speyside, went up to Copperbrook, and did a tasting at Glenellicky, which was really cool. Managed to get in there. And then where else did I go? I went to Glenlivet as well. So their new place. They've spent a lot of money in their new visitor centre, which looks absolutely stunning.
It does look good. I think it needed it, to be honest, as well. It was a bit late.
Yeah, it was getting a bit dated.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lindsay Gray looked after me up there, sorted me out with their single barrel tasting, which was really cool. So just went through four or five different single barrels up there. Guy called Andrew did the tasting. Really, really good guy. Actually knows his stuff as well. So definitely recommend putting Glenlivet on your to-do list next time you're up in Speyside. Go and check it out.
Yeah, Week of the Glens, man. I did a tasting as well. It was actually on the same day as I did the tasting with the American guys, was with Glenturret. Jamie Morrison and Colin Hart came down from the Glenturret distillery and brought down their new 2021 releases. And the new 15-year-old is really, really delicious, actually. Really impressed with that. Obviously, Bob Dalgarno's behind the whiskey making story there as well. So there's some interesting stuff going on. I need to go up for food, because that restaurant that they've got at that place is it's off the chain.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I've been up there. I haven't eaten up there yet, but Colin had me up, and I did a little video up there and hung out with the guys, and yeah, it's unbelievable to see. Really cool as well. One of the stories that I got was that Edrington had a lot of offers for that distillery, and one of the offers that they took was from Lalique because they saw what they were going to do with it. So they could have got a lot more money for that distillery, but when they saw the plans of what they were going to do, they're like, well, this is better for Scotland, it's better for the tourist industry and the whiskey industry for them taking it over. So hats off to them for doing that. I mean, let's give them a little clap for that.
Nice.
So yeah, well, on that point, sound effects now in Not Another Whiskey podcast, and new microphones, mate. New microphones. Listen to these bad boys.
Microphones. We're investing heavily behind this podcast, Mitch. Yeah.
It's going crazy, man. We've also got a website now as well.
We have a website. Yep. And we have our Instagram channel. So thanks to everyone that's followed along and engaged with us and sent us some lovely recommendations and some strongly worded feedback and criticism. It's all very, very welcome.
What's the best strongly worded criticism you've had so far, Daz?
Do you know what it is? It's somebody says you need to stop swearing.
My mum said that. She was like, you need to stop swearing on your podcast. That's why I don't do it anymore.
It was her that texted me.
Oh, was it?
No.
Just tell her to fuck off. Anyway, on that, no, don't tell my mom to fuck off. No one tell my mom to fuck off, please. That'd be bad. She's definitely not listening to any more episodes after that.
No, we're down to 332 followers now.
Right, so enough of that. What are we going to talk about this week, Daz? Let's get into this. So we're going to talk a little bit about World Whiskies, which is kind of cool. But I think before we get in that, let's find out what's been going on in the world of whiskey. What news have we got? Daz and Mitch's Whiskey News of the Week.
The Whiskey Exchange, right, it's just an amazing thing that Sukhinder and Raj have built, and it's a resource for information. It's a place that you can buy almost anything that's available, that has been available ever in whiskey. You could basically get it at the Whiskey Exchange, and they've sold it to Pernod Ricard, which is like, I don't know, man. I mean, I know there was probably a few people in for it, but imagine, bit of a curveball, I suppose. I don't know what you thought. Did you see it coming?
Mate, not at all. I mean, when I read the press release on that, I was completely blown away. Whiskey show down in London was on. That was huge.
Yep.
A lot of people down there. Great to see everyone having a good time. Apart from us, it was my wife's birthday weekend, so there's no way I was going to be going down to that. But cool to see everyone down there having a good time. A little bit of normality resuming,
Yeah, absolutely. Whiskey Live Paris, and then there's a sort of some of the, I don't mean smaller in a negative way, but some of the more regional, local type whiskey shows taking place as well. We've got obviously Darrick's Whiskey Stramash at the end of the month, which is always good. I'm actually at Robbie's Drams on Saturday, so we're going to drop this on the Sunday, so it'll be the day before we drop the episode. But Robbie's Drams down in Ayr is always a really good one. There's always good people turn up, and we get out and get tasting some whiskies. I'll be doing some Fable whiskey tastings and things like that, which should be a good laugh. And oh, mate, see, sometimes when you think, right, what did we say we'd done 30 years in the industry or something like that?
Combined, yeah. So like within that, you would expect we should know roughly what we're kind of talking about. So we had a conversation about the Gordon and MacPhail 80-year-old bottling, and had a bit of a bet on, didn't we? We did. I think you lost.
I did lose. I lost by 90k. So,
but to be fair, I still lost by quite a bit as well.
What did you say?
I think I said 80 grand.
Did you? I said 50. No, did I say 50? Yeah.
Yeah, you said 50 or 40, I think you said.
Right.
Something like that. And I said 80, but it ended up going for 140, was it?
Yeah. $147,000, I think it went for in the end. Yeah.
Incredible.
Which is incredible. Also, so in that same episode, we talked about, this was the Gordon MacPhail, the oldest whiskey ever sold. It was an 80-year-old from the Glenlivet distillery. So really special, very rare thing. So congratulations to the guys at Gordon MacPhail for putting out that. But just last week as well, or was it Friday last week, the Dalmore Decades thing that we talked about before as well, the collection. So that set did sell at Sotheby's in Hong Kong, and they achieved 1.1 million for that, which is pretty incredible. Just to confirm, that's 6 bottles of whiskey.
That's getting to scary prices.
God. The Glenmorangie Lighthouse Project. So this is basically a Willy Wonka still set up at the Glenmorangie distillery, where Dr. Bill and his troop of distillers and whiskey makers can go in and just do some mad stuff. That's pretty much the essence of it, I think. I think that's what I took from the press release.
Yeah, I think Dr. Bill's going to grow his hair and it'll be like Rapunzel, up in his big 20-meter high, because I think it's 20 meters high, right?
It's a big lookout tower, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's got like a sensory office at the top and all this kind of stuff, a tasting room. It'd be interesting to see, because I think there's the stills are underneath that office. So I wonder because that must be getting really hot all the time, with hot air rising and you're sitting above these stills. I'm assuming they've put in some kind of insulation or something like that, or else, Dr. Bill's going to lose about 2 stone.
Yeah, it'll be like Bikram whiskey making. You've got to go up and you've got to do it in your pants.
Mate, you imagine that, walking in, Dr. Bill's just sitting there in pants, sweating, drinking whiskey.
Pouring water on his head and smelling whiskey.
Sorry, Dr. Bill, if you listen.
Sorry. Apologies, sir.
All right, I think the other big thing that I just saw this week, so this is new news. Clydeside Distillery in Glasgow has launched their first ever whiskey, which is kind of cool. I was there a good couple of years ago now. Amazing distillery. If you're in Glasgow, go check it out. Right by the SECC, right on the water there, right on the Clyde. Beautiful visitors centre. They've got a cafe and everything as well. And then Lochlear, which is a new distillery in South Ayrshire, but have been keeping everything very much under wraps. They literally today just released some posts of their bottling that they're going to be bringing out, which looks quite interesting. So yeah, 2 new distilleries in Scotland that are now legally allowed to sell whiskey, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's massive. I mean, it is a big time, isn't it? A big moment because of the investment, building a distillery, getting staff, buying raw materials, getting all that going. And actually you can't call it whiskey for sort of 3 years. So yeah, I'm sure that means a lot to these guys once these bottlings come out. We've seen that with Rassay, we've seen it with Ardnamurchan, and it's cool, that we're going to start seeing more of these things happening as these distilleries become true whiskies. So yeah, I'm really pleased for Clydeside, particularly because I think distilling in Glasgow, or whiskey stories within Glasgow in the city, are so important. And there's actually so little activity actually happens in the city centre of Glasgow these days. And when I was at White Mackay, we had the blending room there. And I always remember Richard telling me about the early days in Glasgow. And, you would go down the streets of Glasgow and you would see all of the kind of whiskey makers' bonds and things like that, quite central within the city. And even the 106 blending room that Edrington had was in Glasgow in the city centre as well. And it's all kind of moved away now. So it's great that Clydeside's there. It's great that it's becoming a whiskey, because I think and we talked about this in one of the episodes before, I just think it's a beautiful, brilliantly well thought through distillery from a production point of view, but also just from a visitor experience point of view. Yeah. Always send people there, go get a decent lunch, get a good bottle of whiskey, because they sell everything as well. It's like a proper whiskey shop. It's not just their own stuff, right? Which is great.
Yeah, I love to see that. I was actually a little bit shocked when I saw that when I went in there. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. But I suppose
I bought a beanie. I got a really good beanie. I'll send you a picture of it. It's decent.
Nice. Is it yellow? It's always yellow.
It's not. It's red, black, and white.
Yeah. Well,
and because I've got a massive head, it's about a size too small.
But back to whiskey and away from your fashion sense.
Yeah.
And on the subject of new distilleries, kind of exciting, because the next episode we are going to be in a new distillery to record the next podcast.
Yeah.
So we're going to be going into the Holyrood distillery, sitting down with our mate Nick and their distillery manager as well, to chat about everything Holyrood distillery. So that's going to be the next episode, which is going to be fun. Going on location again.
Mate, it's going to be really, really, really good. But let's get back to what we're here to talk about today, which is about World Whiskies.
When was the first time that you became aware of whiskey outside of Scotland, USA, and Ireland?
Yeah, bartending in Rick's. I remember I had Suntory Hibiki on the bar, and I used to love making Scotch and Japanese old fashioned. So I'd actually use equal measures of Scotch and Japanese whiskey and just create a cocktail with a bit of a story and connecting these two cultures. And obviously there's more to this and we'll come on to it, I'm sure, at some point. But that was the first time for me as a bartender, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I was the same as well. Well, it wasn't when I was bartending, but definitely Japanese whiskey for me. And it was when Jamie McDonald was talking about Yamazaki. And I was like, okay, well, what's this stuff? And I remember him giving me a few bottles of Yamazaki, actually, which I held on to for a long time. Unfortunately, drank them all now because the price of that has gone through the roof. I remember actually doing tastings, well, not tastings, but festivals, where Jamie McDonald was there talking about Yamazaki. And he was literally like, no one wants to drink this stuff. Like, I can't give it away. And we'd do swaps at the end of it. Like, I'd give him a bottle of Talisker. He'd give me like 5 bottles of Yamazaki, which was back in the crazy days when no one was really interested in.
But the Japanese were into whiskey quite early. I mean, there's 8 distilleries, I think, in Japan as we speak right now. It may have changed slightly, but it's about that. And it goes back a long old way. The kind of godfathers, if you like, of whiskey. You've got Shinjiro Tori and Masataka Taketsuru, who were 2 guys who are really the kind of grandfathers of Japanese whiskies, and they brought this idea to life back in the kind of 1920s, really. The interesting thing about Masataka was that he did study in Scotland at Glasgow University. And whilst he was here in Scotland, he had an apprenticeship at a number of distilleries in Scotland, and 2 distilleries that a lot of people will know. Well, maybe not everyone will know, but they're easy enough to find out about. Longmorn and Hazelburn are 2 distilleries that he worked at. And I got told, I remember years ago, it was probably around this kind of time, actually, in the early 2000s, when we were talking about Japanese whiskey, and I was kind of exploring it for the first time. They're like, see that guy that went over from Japan, went to university here. He stole our whiskey, took it back to Japan and stole all our ideas, and Japanese whiskey became this thing. And they were like, well, but it wasn't only the whiskey he stole. I was like, what do you mean? I said, well, he also stole our women as well, because he actually married a Scottish lady. And they lived in Campbelltown. It was during that time that they settled there, and then ended up going back to Japan. So it's a story really that goes back a long way, 100 years really. And I think it's one of those ones that people quite often forget, that Scotch whiskey is very open in terms of sharing knowledge, sharing expertise and things like that. And as we go around the world, visiting some of these countries, we'll probably find that someone from Scotland's been involved in the background, helping source pot stills, ideas about whiskey making, even cask sourcing and stuff like that,
And the interesting thing right now with Japanese whiskey is they're changing everything around. We're realizing that it's not all Japanese whiskey that was going into Japanese whiskey. There was a lot of Scotch whiskey they were throwing in as well. So it's interesting to see how that whole story is unfolding right now. But anyway, moving away, I think, from Japan, when we talk about, other world whiskies, the interesting one as well is America. We've always known about American whiskies, and that's always been a traditional one, but the whole craft distilling in America really took off in a big way. And for me, that was interesting going around the US, and I've chatted about this before on the podcast, but just seeing how different cities adopted their whiskey, that craft whiskey from that city, wherever it would be. We're talking about Westland earlier on. Yeah, you used to see Westland everywhere in Seattle when I went around Seattle, which was really cool to see. And that's how I kind of got into them and started drinking.
But you were living there at a time when it was booming, right? There must have been numbers of distilleries opening every day at that time when you were in California at the time, right?
It was to the point where, I'd try and visit as many as I could.
So this is one of the things, isn't it? So we're going to talk about world whiskies. So we'll obviously touch on American whiskey. It's a separate conversation almost, because we're going to go to other places that are not as established in terms of making whiskey for as long as they had done. And I think the international influence is quite important as well, because these guys that moved over from Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, that went over and actually established some of these distilleries, I like to think of them as having that kind of link back to places like that, because you think of names like Evan Williams, which is a bourbon brand. That's not an typical kind of American name that you would hear. Evan Williams is a very Welsh orientated name, and a lot of these brands were probably established by distillers who moved across 150 years ago or so. Yeah,
that's a nice little segue there, because I think now that you mentioned Wales, we should move into our first whiskey that we're going to try. So guys, just to let you know, we have 5 different world whiskies that we're going to get through on this podcast. So if we start to get a little bit slurry by the end of it, then you guys know why. But the first country we're going to go to is actually Wales, and the one that you guys probably think we're going to pick is Penderyn. Penderyn.
Yeah.
I always want to say Penderyn, but it's Penderyn. But we're not. We're going to go up to the north of Wales, just north of Snowdonia, and we're going to have a look at Aber Falls, which is just it's a new distillery. It was only created in 2017. Now, quite hard to find. Daz, you and I were chatting about this earlier on. Quite hard to find some information on these guys. They've been making, I think they've got 7 or 8 different gins right now. This is their second release of a whiskey. And their first release was sitting at 46% ABV. This one that's come out they've dropped it down to 40, which, I understand why they do that, but it would have been nice to see it at a higher ABV. The price point on it is ridiculous. And when I say ridiculous, I mean ridiculously cheap.
I Googled it today. It was 20 quid, 67p.
And yeah, so that's super cheap. I mean, the retail price, that was on Amazon, right? Is that where you find it? Yeah, so normally it's 26, which is insane. And you look at the bottle as well. It's a beautiful bottle, really kind of chunky, well-made bottle. And the juice is good. The juice is really good.
No, mate, that's pleasant. Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, a little bit of fresh spice. It's nice maltiness, actually. It's not old. You definitely feel a little bit of that youth, but it's quite rounded. It's not too zingy, too jaggy on the kind of palate.
Yeah, and I think the one of the things they're doing, and a lot of these new distilleries are doing this now, is using virgin oak, just to give that little va-va-voom of maturation characteristic.
Yeah.
So these guys are using a little bit.
Talk about Welsh whiskey, I suppose. So it's definitely not a new thing. Wales made whiskey in the past. And I think when you think about Penderyn, and we're going to come back to this guy and talking about Scotland sort of sharing some of its knowledge with the wider kind of whiskey community. So there was a guy called Dr. Jim Swan, who's a really well-known expert, and especially on the distillation side within Scotch. He's passed away, was it 3 years ago?
I think so, yeah.
It would have been, wouldn't it? But his legacy is actually a lot in Scotland, but his legacy goes much further than that, because Penderyn was a distillery that he worked on himself. So he goes to Wales and helps these guys set this distillery up. And I guess that's inspired a new generation of whiskey lovers. And here is a distillery that is almost a kind of symptom of that enthusiasm and passion for whiskey. But I think this is nice. It's really good, and for the price point, it's absolutely bang on. I
mean, if you want a whiskey that you just want to sip on, not be too challenged by, let's say, and you only want to pay £26 for it, you can't go wrong with this.
I'd bash this into an old fashioned in about 3 seconds.
Yeah, and that's their serve that they're saying for it. Is they actually sent me a bottle of this and sent me it with some Welsh honey. And some tea as well, and that was their kind of serve for their old fashioned. For those that
I've seen
it
knocking about on the gram, and I've noticed that, and I'd like to thank them so much for sending you a bottle and not sending me one. That's really sound of them.
Well, you're drinking some now, so shut your face.
I know, yeah. Cheers, mate. Thanks, I'm a charity case now.
So I tried to find out where the town that is made, and it's literally 20 minutes drive from Aber Falls, which is in Snowdonia, which looks absolutely stunning, by the way. But I could not pronounce the name of the town. So I got our good friend, our Welsh friend.
He's our token Welsh mate, isn't he?
Token Welsh mate, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Mr. Craig Holmes, who's, if you haven't checked out the podcast, the episode that we did with Craig, have a listen to it. It's all about starting your journey in whiskey. So I phoned Craig up and I was like, mate, how do you pronounce this? This is how he replied.
Hi lads, I believe you pronounce it Abergwyngregin, but don't quote me on that because I'm not from North Wales. But shame on you for not being able to say it anyway.
Abergwyngregin.
I mean, to be fair, like the name literally has like a GWYN. All the letters that they shouldn't be together are together, which is pretty much most of the Welsh language. So what do you want to do next, mate?
I want to go abroad on holiday.
Okay. You want something hot?
I'm going to go hot. Let's go to Mexico.
Let's do it, man.
Mexican whiskey is not something that, people automatically assume is a thing, because we know they make beautiful tequilas. We know mezcal. When we talk about mezcal, we often talk about it like single malt Scotch whiskey because of the similarities and some of the smoky characteristics and even some of the production techniques and stuff like that. There can be some quite similarities in distillation and stuff, but like it just go, okay, so whiskey from Mexico. So what's the story here? Because you know the story, right? You've worked with the guys at some point, or
yeah. So this is owned by two guys called Danny and Moy, and Danny and Moy actually started up Milagro. They then
which is a tequila brand, right?
It's a tequila brand that's prominent in the US, and they've been talking about bringing it into the UK for a while. So Danny and Moy then went on to create a mezcal called Montelobos. And then they went on to create a chili liqueur called Ancho Reyes. They then sold off the Milagro side of the business to William Grant & Sons. So Abasolo is their new venture, I suppose, which is Mexican whiskey. Really kind of interesting. I mean, there's a lot of passion. I highly recommend going on YouTube and just typing in Abasolo. They've got a stunning video that sits down with the distillery manager, really kind of goes into the specifics of what they're doing. And their whole thing is about, ancestral corn, really kind of looking back. And I think one of the points that we need to make as well, that we haven't made, when we talk about whiskies from around the world, what you tend to find is that they are going to use the cereal that is local to them or that's available to them. So it kind of makes sense. You think about Scottish whiskey, right? We use barley because barley's easy to grow here. You talk about bourbon and it's going to be using corn because corn was available in the US. Indian whiskey, molasses, so it's whatever's available to you on a large scale that you're going to use.
So there's a couple of cool things that they do, and it is one of those. We're not going to go into it in much depth, but it's 100% corn whiskey. So it smells like that, to be honest. You get that lovely kind of promise of sweetness. It's quite bright. It's quite yellow. You get a lot of kind of pineapple-y, orangey, kind of yellow and orangey fruits coming through.
Sounds good.
It's this ancestral corn that they talk about. I've been to Peru. I've not been to Mexico, but when you go up to these altitudes, so this distillery sits at about 7,500 feet above sea level. But that's 1.5 times Ben Nevis. So like we're really, really high altitude here. And that does tend to be where you find these corns. And this ancestral corn, can you pronounce it?
No, mate. It's
go for it. You ready?
I couldn't even say that Welsh name. So
yeah, your Welsh wasn't very good. I'm not sure what your but I guess this will be kind of the local dialect. Caca Wasotli is the name of the corn type.
It was good, mate. It was good.
Thanks,
good
mate.
effort right there. Yeah, well done.
Very good. There's a process here though, which is quite interesting. So there's like a steeping of the corn right at the start of the process, and it's a way that they've prepared corn for a long, long time. It's called nixtamalization, and it's basically a bath or a steep full of alkaline water, and you fill it with the corn and you leave it there for a period of time. And what it does is it softens the corn, it intensifies the flavors, so that everything you then do there afterwards is the flavor is absolutely the focus of everything that happens through fermentation into distillation. They do actually malt a very small percentage of the corn as well, which is quite unusual. And I guess they're doing that for development of flavor, a bit more complexity, richness, depth, and all that sort of stuff. So whilst it smells young, I actually really like it.
Yeah, I like it. I thought you would like it because I know you're a big tequila fan as well. And for me, this is very spirit forward, right? And what I mean by that is you can really pick up on that spirit characteristic that's coming through, which is probably an age thing, as you said earlier on. I believe this is 2 years old, there or thereabouts. Is one of the things. So they're using New American and virgin wood again. To the virgin wood's obviously going to turbocharge a little bit of that maturation. And yeah, the other interesting thing is they're using champagne yeast in there, and their warehouses are open to the conditions, which is kind of crazy considering, you know, how warm you think Mexico is. And supposedly they have this up there, the seasons, again, they've got like half the season is half humid, and then the other half is very dry.
Well, look, if we get over there, Hilotepec is the name of the town. We need to get over. It's just north of Mexico City. I can't wait to try this in a couple of years. See how the complexity develops. It's a great base, definitely.
The distillery looks so nice. I mean, they've done really kind of modern Mexico. I think, you know, with Danny and Moy, when they had Milagro, they always talked about this modern side of Mexico City, which is where they're from. So they've taken that with this whiskey as well. And you look at the bottle design as well. The bottle design is so cool. I want to go into a bar and see what some really shit hot bartenders are doing with this juice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd imagine in a sour or something like that will be absolutely bang on.
Do you want to go to Israel?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go Israel, man.
This is not a country that you would think of when you think of single malt or even any whiskey. No.
So this is so crazy. This whiskey came onto my radar probably about a year ago, maybe about 2 years ago, I think. It's called Milk and Honey. So it was the first distillery from Israel. Israel now has 4 distilleries, by the way. Did you know that?
Has 4?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this distillery broke ground in 2012, and they first started to run spirit in 2014. So this is Milk and Honey. It's, again, going back to Jim Swan. He was one of the people that consulted on this. And one of the things they talk about with Jim is he loved the fact that Israel has 4 different climates in it. So this really small country has these crazy climates. So what they're actually doing right now is they're maturing in all 4 of those different regions or different areas that have these different styles of climate.
Right.
And the craziest one they're doing is the Dead Sea, 428 meters below sea level. And what they've done there is they've taken 20 casks down, chucked them on a roof of a hotel, and they're maturing them down there. So they've got this crazy thing going on called the Apex casks or Apex bottlings, I think it is. And it's all these experiments that they're doing right now with their juice, which is kind of interesting. So anyway, to rewind a little bit, when they set up the distillery, they wanted to follow all the rules and regulations of Scottish distilleries. So they do things like double distillation. They always age in oak casks. They're filling at 63.5%, exactly the same as us. But their angel share is massive. So you're talking 10 to 11% that they're losing through evaporation. Those casks that I was talking about down the Dead Sea, they estimate 25% per year is getting lost down there.
Wow. So they're not going to keep it there for very long, right?
Exactly, mate. Yeah. So that's going to be coming out pretty soon. So really kind of interesting stuff. They're playing about with different casks as well. They're using beer casks. They're using red wine casks, cognac, and they've even got a pomegranate wine cask that they're using right now, which is kind of crazy. They're importing all their barley from England. But yeah, they're based in Tel Aviv. And to get really geeky, they're actually using Tel Aviv water, but running it through a reverse osmosis process.
You know, before we record these podcasts, Mitch, you should probably just do some research before we start.
Mate, I knew all that already. That wasn't me researching that.
Well, it's funny. I remember I mention this all the time when I worked at Highland Park. But when I did work there, I was up, and Graham Manson, who you know from Glenfiddich and Balvenie and stuff, was the distillery manager up there at that point. And I remember he had an aeroplane, like a model, or it was like a on a plaque of this aeroplane. And I was like, what's that? And he said, well, it's a gift from a guy from Israel who's been here at Highland Park working. I think he worked for a month, and the guy was a pilot. And he was learning about whiskey, and I think it was one of the guys from the Milk and Honey distillery. I think it was one of the guys that's involved. I know there's 5 or 6 of them. I'm sure one of them was a pilot. He'd come over to learn about whiskey, gone back and then opened that distillery. I'll need to check that, but I'm certain that's who it was.
So if anyone listening knows who created Milk and Honey, give us a shout. Pop us an email.
And did he go and pull a few shifts up there at Highland Park, get that malt floor turning and rolling those casks around? Yeah.
Did a mass attack at Sewer, right?
Yeah, man, exactly.
But
Nice. I'm a fan. What's your thoughts?
So, I mean, this one, the one I've got is the really, I think, early release. It's called the Young Single Malt Aged Spirit Triple Cask. What we're looking at here is wine casks, bourbon casks, and an ex-Isla cask.
There is a very soft smidgen of smoke in it, and you pick it up on the nose. It actually comes through a slightly oily. It's got that kind of dirty smoke. It's a little bit wet, mossy type smoke, but it's so soft, the smoke. I mean, it's there though. And as soon as I first picked the glass up, I was like, it doesn't smell like peated barley, but it has that little hint of something in there, you know?
I get it more on the palate. For me, it's like that finish. You just get that little puff. A little puff of smoke, mate.
Little puff of smoke. Quite okay. Dry astringency at the back.
Really dry. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm excited to see what these guys are going to do in the future. You know, I think this is one to watch out for. I mean, it's not every day you get to drink a whiskey from Israel, right?
No, and it's not every day you get to taste gold cock. So I've been over to the Czech Republic quite a few times, and I told you the story, remember, when I was honoured enough to open the Czech Highland Games down in Sikrov. It's a career highlight, I'm not going to lie. And they do love whiskey. There is some older gold cocks that are from the kind of 90s. And I think this distillery started to distill whiskey back in the communist era, around 1973. Is when Gold Cock was established as a distillery. Started to produce some whiskies, and I think it just had its ups and downs and things like that, and eventually was bought over in the early 2000s by a plum spirit distiller, fruit wine distiller, and things like that. And those sort of parts of the world, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, they drink a lot of slivovitz. I don't know if you've tried much of that. The plum brandies, yeah.
I have, yeah.
So these guys made quite a lot of that. So they actually moved the distillery up to Moravia, which is in like the east side of the Czech Republic. And really, these guys are flying the flag for Czech whiskies. I think it's at different ages. They're actually using a lot of local oaks. So they're picking up some of these Cecile oaks, Quercus petraeas, some of these more kind of Central Eastern European oak types, which are delicious. And when we use those for single malt Scotch here in Scotland, these casks bring this lovely, what I call kind of patisserie style qualities, quite buttery and creamy, lovely vanilla notes. They're a bit richer than American oak. They're heavier in tannins, so they do bring a bit more texture and a bit more body to the whiskies. So
can we just...
Some of the Gold Cocks definitely get great reviews. I've seen a couple of reviews online, and they do get well spoken of. This one,
can we just get the elephant out of the room though? It's called Gold Cock.
Yeah.
Can we do some jokes about that quickly?
Like, I don't really have any.
So, you know, you go in a bar and you see that whiskey is behind the bar, and you're like, "Hey, bartender, can I get some of your Gold Cock?"
And what happened next?
But I don't know.
That's
depends
it.
Depends what kind of bar it is, right? I'm holding the bottle. I've got a Gold Cock in my hand right now.
What does it look like?
It says aged 3 years, and this one is the Red Feathers, 40% ABV. So this is their blended version. So I don't know where, I don't know what they're blending in with here. If anyone knows anything about Gold Cock, if anyone's had a Gold Cock in their mouth and wants to share that with us, then let us know.
Just tell us how was it? Better than I thought. It's a wee bit edgy, isn't it? A wee bit spiky.
Yeah.
Generally, what we've tasted has been really nice. This one's probably not for me. When I say probably, I mean it's definitely not for me. But this is the thing, isn't it? As you go around the world, and we've gone from Mexico to Wales to the Czech Republic to Israel, exploring these different whiskies, all influenced really by Scotch, some of them directly by people like kind of Dr. Jim Swan and things like that. I've got some Japanese whiskies here. I've actually got the lakes where obviously our good pal Deval works and puts together some of these whiskies from down south. And even up to the Denmark and Sweden and places like that. Stoning's a great example of a fabulous whiskey producer that's doing some really cool stuff. I've got the Danish Rye here, and I'm a massive fan of that. Punchy as well, 50%, super spicy, really tasty, and beautiful, beautiful distillery as well. So it's good to see so many of these different things coming from all over the world.
It's time for Mitch and Daz's interesting Scotch whiskey facts that definitely won't get you laid. For this week's interesting facts that won't get you laid, obviously I'm going to do it about world whiskey. I'm going to chat about Australia here because we haven't really touched on Australia or that part of the world yet, but Australia now has over 300 craft distilleries, which is pretty incredible considering that recently up until recently, there was only a handful of them. And what changed was the law, or the archaic law, I should say, that outlawed the use of a small still. So this was changed in the 90s by a gentleman called Bill Lark, who basically went, guys, this is bullshit. Let's get this sorted out. Bill then went on to create the Lark Distillery in Tasmania, which is now producing award-winning whiskies. And there's some fantastic whiskies out there. I think Starward is one that I've tried recently, which I know has been a big push with Diageo and their Distill Ventures. And then moving over to India, India has 4 of the top selling whiskies in the world. Going to number 1 is McDowell's, followed by Officer's Choice, and then Imperial Blue, and then Royal Stag. So that is when you look at whiskies from around the world. They are the top 4. Number 5 is Johnny Walker. So that gives you an idea of how much whiskey they are selling over there. Now, one of the reasons that India has such popular whiskies is they're making it with molasses, which means it's very, very cheap to buy. In Iceland, the distillery called Floki uses sheep dung to smoke their whiskey. So let us know if you've been brave enough to try that one. I know I definitely haven't, but we should have put that in here, Daz. Maybe the next time.
Yep.
Aurora Spirit in Norway is the most northern distillery in the world, and the Cardrona distillery in New Zealand is the southernmost distillery in the world. So Cardrona, which I tried recently, actually, really kind of impressive liquid. Not the cheapest whiskey I've ever tried for the age, but really good juice, really interesting juice. But staying in New Zealand, they actually had a flourishing whiskey industry back in the 1830s. And get this, Daz, it was so successful that the Scottish banks started to get a little bit worried. So what they did was they agreed to fund the country's railways on the proviso that the government outlawed local distilling, making it illegal to make whiskey in New Zealand. And that rule wasn't reversed until 1970. How crazy is that? So us Scots stopped the Kiwis from making whiskey.
Well, at least we could stop them doing something because they keep pumping us at rugby all the time.
True story. But yeah, the cool thing is we now have 19 distilleries on the island of New Zealand, not Scotland. But yeah, and they've just recently put the definitions of what a Kiwi whiskey should taste like, which are very similar to Scotch whiskey. So there you go. And the last interesting fact that will not get you laid is the residents of Singapore drink around about 13 bottles of Scotch per year, making them the largest Scotch whiskey consuming market per capita in the world.
Nice. I've got a good joke, a whiskey joke. Are you ready?
Go for it.
Okay. You alluded to the point earlier when we were talking about Japanese whiskies, how you mentioned that not all Japanese whiskey has to be from Japan. It's quite often a blend of Scotch and Japanese, and sometimes not that much Japanese whiskey goes into Japanese whiskey. So you ready for this? What do they call Japanese whiskey in Scotland?
Go on.
Ben Nevis.
I was lucky enough to sit down with my good friend Sam Simmons from boutique whiskey company, Atom Brands. He is the whiskey maker there. All right, Sam. So welcome to Not Another Whiskey podcast, man. Thanks for joining us.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. It's a real honor to be here.
Well, firstly, thank you not only for being on the podcast, but sending this delicious whiskey out to me, which I want to discuss with you in just a second. So for those who don't know who Sam is, Sam and I go way back to our William Grant & Sons days, where he was the global ambassador for Balvenie. And then he moved over to Atom Brands, and now he is the whiskey maker for Atom Brands. I've got that right, Sam?
Yeah, I think they call me something else, whiskey administrator or no. Yes, head of whiskey. So it's really very lucky. Even we've said it a million times when we were ambassadors together. Dream job, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Still living the dream. Then get to do whiskey design and work with awesome people and take casts and find out something clever to do with them. And it's real adventure every day.
Amazing, mate. So tell everyone what's your kind of day to day. What do you kind of do as a whiskey maker for Adam Brandt?
It's probably less romantic. Just like when probably both of us can relate to this. When we got into whiskey and you actually went to the distilleries and met the makers, and you had these. It's like you had posters of David Stewart on your wall at home, but you idolized these whiskey makers, and then you would say, "Oh, David, Doublewood, such a delight." He goes, "Well, all I do is I do this and I do that." No, but David, come on, Portwood is so well. All we did, we're very lucky. The guys at the distillery, they do this, and that sort of modesty and the day to day, and even the fact that he started as a stocks clerk, and really until they invented the name Malt Master, he really is a stocks manager. And that's essentially what I do. I manage the stock that Toby Cutler and Felix Deere buy for us because we don't own distilleries. So the spirits they bring into the business, I sort of manage that and figure out what destiny those liquids go to, and then manage the teams that help make that come to life.
I think you're underplaying yourself a little bit there, mate. That's a very skilled job doing that and putting those whiskies together, especially when I look at this out of this world whiskey blend that you sent me. And all the whiskies that you put in there. I think I did the maths on this quickly. I think you put 28 whiskies in there from 14 different countries. Am I right in saying that?
I need to check that, but I trust your facts. I think it's 14 and 26.
26, okay.
Yeah, but 26 different spirits, I suppose. But 14 different countries.
Which ties in fantastically well with what we're talking about on this episode, because we're talking about world whiskies. So we've already tried a couple of whiskies from around the world. So it'd be great to get your take on what you think about this current climate that we're looking at right now, which is, just it's kind of almost new territory, right? Pretty much every country now is almost making their own whiskey. So your experiences of them, I mean, looking through this world blend that you put together, I think you had France in there. You had some Japanese, Taiwanese, Danish was in there as well. So you're obviously very well versed in what's going on around the world with world whiskies. What stands out for you right now? What's some of your picks?
Okay, so a lot of questions there, bud. You ready? I don't know which one you want me to answer, but I'll just speak for a bit.
All that, Sam.
The genesis of this idea came from traveling the world representing Balvenie, because you would go to different countries. I could be in Taipei or Toronto, and people drink whiskey differently in each of those places. And I can tell you, it's generally not with a Glencairn glass. Sure, when we're appreciating a spirit, we use, fancy glassware, but most of the public, and 90% of the whiskey consumed around the world is consumed mixed. When I had Balvenie in Red Bulls, I had Balvenie in coconut water, I had Balvenie in green tea, in nightclubs in China. And it really opened my eyes to the practicality of this drink. It's so great to spend time mulling over a dram and celebrating the nuances and fermentation times and line arm angles and all that shit. But fundamentally, it's just a drink. But also, it's so much more than a drink. So it's that dichotomy that's sort of trying to play with. So we made this thing called World Whisky Blend, which was for drinking. It was for mixing. It was a whiskey blended to be approachable in price, around 30 quid, blended from craft whiskeys all over the world. And then Out of This World was born soon after that, when we were discussing with some friends how Karazawa in particular was getting out of control on the secondary market. This is a closed Japanese distillery. And, back when I worked at the Whiskey Exchange, you could buy a bottle for £100, and that was a lot of money. For £100, those bottles are now 4,000 to 14,000 pounds each. So that was kind of blowing my mind. So we decided to take some Karazawa by way of protest and stripped the value of it by sending it to space. So by having it leave Earth's atmosphere, and there's a service you can do that with online where they send it up in a balloon, it leaves the atmosphere, it's no longer a product of Japan. So it's no longer Karazawa, in fact. So that was the beginning of the Out of This World Whiskey Blend, literally sending it out of this world, bringing it back home, and then blending it with some of the best whiskeys that I had tasted since working at Boutique. And these are whiskeys from all over the world. We bottle at Boutique whiskeys from Australia, Japan, like you said, Taiwan, Italy, Switzerland, America, Canada, all over the world. And so it was some of the real gems that we had found, or to be quite honest, some of the remnants we had sitting in our warehouse in Edinburgh were selected and recipeed up during lockdown. You know, things I had access to that I didn't need to pull samples of is what we worked with, things that we already had. And then, yeah, Out of This World was born.
So out of the whiskeys that you're getting around the world right now, where do you put in a scale? I mean, you've obviously got a scale of what you enjoy and what you rate. What are the top sort of 3 countries in your opinion?
That was your original question, wasn't it? Sorry, I fucking lost track. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to get in trouble here because
you are
probably, but I grew up, or whatever you want to say. I came to whiskey through Scotch. I came to whiskey at the feet of great whiskey teachers, Richard Patterson, Charlie McLean, when I lived in Edinburgh, John Glaser, all these people who praised Scotch and said, what can it be? What has it been? And what will it be in the future? That sort of romantic storytelling. And I still think that Scotch has a deserved place at the top of the hierarchy, if there's such a thing, of global whiskey. But as you said earlier, the whole world that drinks Scotch whiskey is now making it everywhere. And I think Scotch needs to really watch that, because some of the, I guess, I don't know, what do we say? It's easy to become a bit complacent when you're on top and maybe start focusing on yield rather than flavor, and start focusing on shorthand efficiencies that maybe don't serve the final product the best. And when other people start picking up this craft, sure, inspired by Scotland and inspired by the great distilleries of Scotland, when they pick up this craft, they maybe go back to the more traditional methods, and they might surpass in flavor. We might have 3-year-old whiskeys from Australia that taste like 12-year-olds. And that was the revelation I had. I had samples that Felix brought back from Australia for the Australia series that we bottled earlier this year, that I had just the day before tasted cast samples of 16 and 18-year-old Mortlocks, Old Lafroigs, a Cardew, which is really rare to see for a broker market type of indie bottle stuff. And when we had these Australian whiskeys, they blew my mind. They were rich and deep, and you had no idea they were so juvenile, but they certainly weren't immature. They were awesome whiskeys. So I think for me, Australia is the place I look to with the most excitement, but I think we often overlook things close to home, like England, Wales, and especially for me, Canada. I mean, in Canada, Canadian whiskey has a reputation of being one thing, where of course it's not. It's so diverse, and it is the original global blended whiskey. And it has been doing it for hundreds of years. So that's sort of where we take inspiration for World Whisky Blend, but also where we look to for single malts coming out of the country now, in the West Coast, especially West Coast of the US, Copperworks and Westland, both in Seattle, 2 of the best malts, I think, in the world, certainly in the US. And yeah, Australia, US, England, Wales, the whole world is making delicious, delicious cereal-based drinks.
I mean, it's interesting for me, because I remember when I went over to the US with Glenfiddich for the first time, which I think you were still over there. You were in New York. I went over to California. So this was 2010. And it blew my mind, just going around the US, seeing all these craft distilleries that were popping up. And I got so excited about it. This was a new thing for me. And I mean, you know, going back to that time, I think Arran was probably the only new distillery that we had in Scotland. And it hadn't, the whole craft thing that you're seeing happening now in Scotland hadn't really taken off, but it had started to do so in the US. But to your point that you went back to earlier on, it wasn't always great whiskey that I was trying from all these craft distilleries. And I think now there are some phenomenal one. You mentioned Westland there. I think Westland produces the best peated whiskey outside of Scotland right now, which is a big statement. Someone might correct me on that, but you know, that's just my opinion. I think they do some really good juice. So it's great to see what's going on. But let's go back to your whiskey here. So I sat with this for a while, man, and kind of went through it. There's a lot going on, as I expected. For someone who wants to know what the Out of This World whiskey blend actually is, how would you describe it, sort of tasting note wise? Is there any kind of particular flavors that you get coming through this whiskey?
Taste is so individual and subjective, and I think the intention from a sort of recipe side was to try to let every country, or the characteristic that I think is typical of each style that was in the mix, has room to shine through. So I think that, and I think I'm confident in saying that if you're a bourbon drinker, you're going to detect bourbon in this whiskey. If you're an old grain whiskey fan, you're going to detect old grain. If you're a sherry cask fan, you're going to detect 7 to 10-year-old sherry cask whiskeys. I think there's room. It's blended in a way that hopefully everything along a very wide spectrum of flavor, I think, and a long flavor experience. So it starts bright and ends like warehousey. I think along that full flavor spectrum, there will be different jumping off points for everyone. There's a blueberry, there's like a big fruity Irish whiskey in there. And I think right around mid palate, people will pick that up if that's the kind of style they're used to. So I think it's a whiskey that hopefully speaks to everyone, and not to get too airy fairy, but we are living on one planet. We were more distant than we have been in a long time when I was blending this. And it was a nice reminder that we're actually much closer than we realize in all sorts of ways. And so without getting too hippy dippy or deep on it, that's the idea, is that there's room for everyone. There's room for all these different voices to be heard in one glass. So World Whisky Blend, is an approachable price, about 30 pounds a bottle, depending where you buy. And that's, really destined to be mixed. But this is the same idea, but destined to be sipped. And including whiskeys as young as 3, but as old as 44, and including some that's from closed distilleries that we sent into space, as I mentioned, and bottled at 43.6. We sell this for 100 pounds. So the idea for me was to be in the ballpark of sort of a Johnny Walker Blue, because I look to the great blenders of Scotch for inspiration. You were saying a moment ago about inconsistency, or the reputation that craft distillers had when they first started, or when you first moved to the States. And I think it's fair. And I think it's actually really a parallel to 250 years ago, the reputation Scotch whiskey had south of Hadrian's Wall, which was, it was rot gut, it was inconsistent, it gave you a headache, it was rough, it was a rough spirit, it was a Highlander's elixir, and that's where it was popular up north. But that changed, of course, with blending, where you could make something more palatable. And so looking to that for influence, we're trying to find a way to take sometimes these wild young, Empire ryes or Danish rye whiskeys or Dutch rye whiskeys, these young malts from Australia or Italy or Taiwan, and mix them together with 42-year-old grain, 40-year-old Speyside whiskey, Japanese mid-age whiskey, 18-year-old New Zealand really woody wine cask whiskey that come all together and let them all speak and be illuminated in their own way. And so the volume, I think it was 220 bottles is what it yielded in total. And they're all only available in the UK. And it's sort of an unrepeatable thing, the Out of This World whiskey blend.
Once it's gone, people. So get out there, search it out.
Look, I'm really grateful. It's so cool how many retailers picked this up. I have to say, we got a lot of support. Even, one bottle here, one bottle there, 6 bottles here, 6 bottles there. Really, really grateful for all these independent retailers picking up a product like this, something to talk about and something to be shared and enjoyed.
Amazing. Well, Sam, thank you very much. But before you go, take your Scotch whiskey hat off. You're allowed to drink one whiskey from one country for the rest of your life. Where's it going to be?
Oh, you're an asshole. Well, that's fine. I think it's pretty easy. I think like I said earlier, it's always important to remember that whiskey is a drink. I love mulling over a dram with friends and like throwing notes back and forth, but I also just like having a drink. And for that, great American bourbons, some young American ryes I love as well, but I'm going to go with Bain's South African grain whiskey, based on corn. I think maize, growing up in Canada, corn whiskey is one of my favorite type of beverages, alcoholic beverages. And I think Bain's doing a beautiful, beautiful bourbon cask corn whiskey in South Africa. So I'll choose that.
Yeah. So Brendan's going to be happy that you picked that. He was on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, so he's going to be a happy man when he listens to this.
Perfect. Yeah, good. I don't mind kissing ass. No, it's the truth. You know me.
Absolutely. All right, Sam. Well, thanks again for being on the podcast, man. Daz, back to you.
It's so interesting just to hear Sam talking about that. And this is twice on this episode that Mitch has been sent a bottle that I've not been sent. So it's just a steady reminder, Mitch, that just keep those samples coming to Charity Case Haldane over here. And also, just whilst we're on the point, that interview, I'm not involved.
I know, mate. Well, he said,
where was my invite?
I think what he said to me was, I want to be on your podcast, but I don't want to listen. I don't want to chat to that Daz guy. So can we just do it?
I don't blame him, to be fair.
No, I mean, Sam's a busy boy. So I basically grabbed him and I said, look, let's just do this interview really quickly and I'll record it all and chuck it all in. So and he's got a young family as well. We tend to record this a little bit later than normal. So yeah. But no, really cool that he jumped in. What did you think of the whiskey, man?
There's a big kind of orangey, big vanilla hit on the nose. But actually, as you dig in a little bit deeper, it does get a little bit softer than that. You know, there's a kind of floral, almost slightly soft, fruity, apricot-y kind of quality as well, which leads you in a different direction. It takes you probably back more so to classic kind of space-sidey vibes, you know?
Yeah. I mean, he sent me the spec list on this, which he told me to not post on social or anything like that. But it's incredible, the whiskies he put in here. Like I think we said in the interview, 14 different countries from around the world that he played about with.
So 14 different countries in this one glass.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Love that.
So
what's the strangest country, do you think, on the list that's maybe a bit like, I didn't even know they had a distillery?
Yeah, he put in, you know, Dutch, there's some Ireland there, there's some bourbon, there's some Japanese, there's some New Zealand. We've got Irish, we've got Empire Rye, Taiwanese, Swiss, Italian, French, Dutch, quite a few Speyside, some Swedish, some Danish rye, Tennessee rye. He just went all over the world, man. I mean, what a great way to finish this tasting off, right?
So nice. Totally. Taiwanese whiskies as well, man. I mean, we haven't even touched on that. And they're, you know, that follow on from the big boom in the early 2000s of single malt whiskey becoming this, you know, interesting thing in different places. Taiwan were right at the front of that wave, you know. So I think Kavalan opens about 2005. So nice to see international distilleries challenging us. Talk about Westlands, looking at heritage styles of barley, you know, not chasing yield, doing things in the way that we used to do it here back in the 80s and the 90s and things like that. And actually they're prodding us and saying, why are you doing that? Why are you chasing the volume? Because it's such an established industry here. You know, do we need to review some of our philosophies as whiskey makers here in Scotland because of what's happening out there in Japan, in America, and in these different countries around Europe and things like that? You know, it's a wee bit deep for me, but it just is something that just sort of sticks out in my mind as we're sort of chatting through, you know?
Yeah, no, 100%. No, it's been interesting, mate. It's been really cool going through these whiskies with you. Thank you guys if you're still listening to us. It's been a bit of a geeky one for us, this one. We're normally a little bit less serious than this, but we kind of dug deep this time.
Yeah. No, mate, that was really fun. I really enjoyed that. It was brilliant to blast through those whiskies with you. And, you know, probably descend into complete debauchery when we catch up with Nick and the guys over at the Holyrood Distillery in a couple of weeks' time.
Absolutely.
But massive thanks to Sam for joining from Boutique. That's a whiskey I really enjoy. And I'm going to go back to add a bit of water and just see what's happening, see if I can pick out all these different distilleries. But yeah, good to catch up with you, mate, over a few whiskies.
Absolutely. Likewise, man. And thank you guys for listening in. Tune in for the next episode and slange boom boom.
Slangy boom boom.